I'm not going to take too much time speaking. I want to introduce our first speaker, Nicole. Nicole is a senior associate at Adams & Adams. She specializes in the enforcement of intellectual property rights, in particular trademarks and copyright litigation. Nicole is going to have a very interesting discussion with us about the regulation of processed meats and the impact on plant-based meat alternatives. I had an opportunity to speak to Nicole about her topic last week, and I'm very excited to hear more from her. So without further ado, Nicole, please come forward.
The meat industry and the plant-based industry were not at loggerheads with one another. According to reports from a food awareness group called ProVeg, in April this year, the meat and plant-based industries were in talks with the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development regarding the regulation of meat analog products, more commonly known as plant-based meat alternatives. According to ProVeg, this resulted in the department in April 2022 indicating that it would develop regulations seeking to regulate meat analog products sold in South Africa. What has transpired since this point, in my mind, is analogous with what transpired between the Capulets and the Montagues in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. I suspect that consumers ultimately will play the role of the star-crossed lovers, and I wonder what the fate of our choices will be when it is all said and done. To set the scene for this drama to unfold, we should take note of the Agricultural Products Standards Act, which, together with its regulations, set out the parameters for the composition of agricultural products from malting barley to canned lychees. In this setting, you can think of the department as the SABS and its regulations as the standards published by the SABS. Section 6 of the Agricultural Products Standards Act appears to be at the heart of the dispute between the parties. It provides that no person shall use any name, word, expression, reference, particulars, indication in any manner, either by itself or in conjunction with any other material, in connection with the sale of a product in any manner that conveys or creates or is likely to convey or create a false or misleading impression as to the nature, quality, or substance of that product. In very simple terms, the purpose of this section is to protect the star-crossed lovers, the ordinary consumer, from being deceived or misled. And if you think the unfolding of this drama is unique to South Africa, you'd be wrong. While this drama is a hot topic in the EU, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, there is little indication that has been given by any of the regulatory bodies as to what plant-based meat alternatives should be called. At this stage, it seems that everybody's approach is to review existing legislation and engage in talks that will assist in creating suitable regulatory frameworks. In South Africa, at least, there have been some interesting developments since April. Contrary to the press releases published in April, on 22 June, the department issued a notice notifying the plant-based industry that use of terms such as hamburger and biltong shall not be used in relation to meat analog products. The reason given in the notice was that meat analog products do not meet the definition for processed meat as set out in the regulations regarding the classification, packing, and marking of processed meat products intended for sale in the Republic of South Africa. That is quite a mouthful, so these will just be the 2019 meat regulations. I'll admit that after having read this notice, I had to go and have a look at what a meat analog product was, because as a consumer and an omnivorous lawyer, it was not a term with which I was familiar. The 2019 meat regulations define meat analog products as products that approximate the aesthetic qualities, which would include the primary texture, flavor, and appearance of a type of meat, and/or the chemical characteristics of a type of meat. Meat analog products are made from non-meat ingredients, sometimes with dairy products, and are available in different forms, including ground meat analogs, emulsified meat analogs, and loose fill. The definition also provided some useful synonyms for what a meat analog product is, and these include meat substitute, mock meat, or imitation meat. While this is the legal definition, quite simply, what a meat analog products are in ordinary parlance are plant-based meat alternatives that are suitable for a vegetarian, strict vegetarian, and/or vegan lifestyle. The 2022 June notice, which was intended to be immediate in its effect, went on to inform the plant-based industry that it was an offence in terms of the 2019 meat regulations to use terms that are prescribed or reserved for raw processed meat products in relation to meat analogue products. Consequently, inspectors were authorised to seize and remove from shelves plant-based meat alternatives where such products are described, for example, as mushroom biltong, vegan nuggets, vegan barbecue ribs, and plant-based chicken-style strips. These seizures would take place, according to the notice, at any point in the supply chain. Following industry outcry, the immediate ban on calling it mushroom biltong was suspended, and the plant-based industry was given 30 days from 24 June to change its packaging. What I found both surprising and interesting about this notice is that it does not mention Section 6 of the Agricultural Product Standards Act. You will recall that this is the provision that prevents the use of false and/or misleading descriptions. Instead, it mentions the definition of processed meat as set out in the 2019 meat regulations, which naturally exclude plant-based meat alternatives, and Section 8 of the Agricultural Product Standards Act, which deals with the processes involved in seizing goods. What was also interesting about the 2019 meat regulations is that those regulations do not seek to regulate meat analogue products or non-meat-based products that, in general appearance, presentation, and intended use, correspond to processed meat products, such as those that would be developed for the vegetarian and vegan market. Similarly, these regulations do not seek to define terms such as hamburger, banger, or boerewors. Another development occurs on the 16th of August. On this date, the Food Safety Agency, the department's designated assignee, issued a letter indicating that it would, with effect from 22 August, seize any meat analogue products presented for sale in South Africa, where said products are labelled using product names product names prescribed or reserved for processed meat. Both this letter and the process intended to be pursued by the Food Safety Agency has been met with criticism and legal action on the basis that it is unlawful and does not follow the prescripts set out in the Agricultural Product Standards Act. While this Act certainly permits seizures in circumstances where there are reasonable grounds to believe that an offence is being committed, the Act does not permit the seizure of goods based on a letter that is sent to the industry generally. Instead, the Act provides that as a first step to seizing goods, a warrant should be obtained. Following the letter published by the Food Safety Agency, the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa entered the fray and instituted urgent proceedings in the High Court sitting in Johannesburg. These proceedings were instituted against both the department and the Food Safety Agency, and the Consumer Goods Council put forth the argument that the 2019 meat regulations do not apply to meat analogue products, and further, that there is no evidence that consumers have been deceived or confused into believing that plant-based meat alternatives are made from real meat. On 19 August, the court issued a rule nisi in terms of which an interim interdict stopping the Food Safety Agency and the department from pursuing its course of action was granted. The court order indicates that the interim interdict will remain in place pending the outcome of the exhaustion of the appeal and review procedures set out under the Agricultural Product Standards Act. The next court date is scheduled for the 17th of November. Following the granting of the interim interdict, saw the 26 August saw the publication and entering into force of the regulations regarding the classification, packing, and marking of certain raw meat products intended for sale in the Republic of South Africa. Again, this is that mouthful, so they're just going to be the 2022 meat regulations. While the definition of a meat analogue remains unchanged and the regulations still do not seek to regulate such products, we have our first legal definitions of terms such as raw burger, raw patty, and raw hamburger patty, raw boerewors, raw bravos, raw banger, and raw sizzler. The 2022 meat regulations do not repeal the 2019 meat regulations and instead only seek to regulate certain types of raw processed meat products and their designations. For me, it was certainly an interesting timeline. Having read many articles that have been published on this topic, it is alleged that at the heart of the dispute between the Capulets and the Montagues is the concern for the consumer and whether or not the consumers are deceived or confused as to the nature of the goods when the products are labelled veggie nuggets. And so we're back to Romeo and Juliet. I find this quote from Juliet's soliloquy quite apt in the circumstances. It does beg the question, what indeed is in a name? So this is the current legal definition of a raw burger, raw patty, and raw hamburger patty currently. Any type of meat product sold under a name in which the words burger, patty, and hamburger patty appear either by itself or in combination with other words or expressions which comply with the compositional standards set out in the 2022 meat regulations. In terms of the compositional standards, which sets out amongst other things the permitted ingredients, it is expressly stated that such goods shall be only made with meat. In terms of this definition then, it is now an offence not only to call it a veggie burger or a plant-based beef-styled patty, but also a hamburger roll. This seems to be a potentially slippery slope, and I wonder how far it will go. Will restaurants have to change their menus to accommodate these regulatory changes? Shall recipe books also have to comply? Will the Cagelia africana, our infamous sausage tree, lose its common name in the tussle over the word sausage? Spur has already complained in the media that following the notices in August, a US-based Meat Beyond, a meat alternative manufacturer, did not deliver meat analog products to South Africa for fear of the goods being seized. Economically, therefore, we have a potentially negative impact for a growing market. Since it is concern for consumers that is according to the role players at the heart of this quest, I had a look at comments left by readers in response to published articles. What is clear from the commentary is that the topic is derisive, and some views are exclusionary and intolerant. While there are clearly consumers adamant that hamburgers should never be plant-based, that is not the same as a consumer being misled about the nature, composition, and quality of the products concerned. Other consumers have expressed their opinion along the lines that the way in which plant-based meat alternatives are labeled is not confusing or misleading, as it is quite clear from the labeling what the product is. My favorite comment was, "I've never confused a soya bean for a ribeye steak, so what is the issue?" Others have suggested that government is overreaching and have asked who is benefiting from these regulations. Some readers have also asked, if not a veggie patty, what then will it be called? I'm of the view that this is indeed a fair question in the circumstances, and to date the regulators, not only in South Africa but around the world, have yet to provide any useful guidance. If not a veggie burger, how do you convey, without confusing or misleading the consumer, what the nature of the product is? Moreover, since plant-based meat alternatives have been around for several decades now, will consumers adopt this new lingo, whatever that may be, or will they continue to refer to their veggie burger as just that? Is there a middle ground and a way forward? I believe that there has to be, because we live in a society where we have chosen tolerance over intolerance, and those who have chosen not to eat meat should be permitted to have that decision respected and not to be excluded from participating in ordinary day-to-day life. In the absence of fair and reasonable regulations, this is unlikely to be achieved. It is therefore up to the Montagues and the Capulets to find the middle ground. And while we await the middle ground, what are we left with? 1, there is still no regulatory guidance provided in respect of what meat analog products should be called on their labeling, except what we cannot call them. 2, much will depend on the Consumer Goods Council's appeal against the letter issued on 22 August earlier this year. 3, for both consumers and manufacturers alike, it is a wait-and-see game. 4, are all these efforts likely to change the way that consumers perceive and refer to such products? In my mom's words, of course I'm still going to call it a veggie burger. How else am I going to tell your dad what we're having for supper? Well, that may be one household's approach. The views on the internet suggest that it won't be a lonely approach. Thank you. No problem.
As we spoke about last week, I embarrassingly once did buy a veggie burger from Woolworths thinking it was a meat burger. So I can understand sometimes where these things can come from, but it does seem like a notionally very strange area for our government to get involved in that. I didn't realize that there was a problem. And I guess for me, the first question would be, why regulate the meat industry further and not create new regulations for meat alternatives?
because what for me is odd in all the notices that have come out, there's been no mention of misleading consumers. And I suspect the reason that we haven't found a middle ground is because nobody knows what to call these products. If they come out and say formally that this is misleading, they can't go back later and say, well, actually, we're going to call this thing veggie burger. I suspect that's why. Nobody knows what to call them. What do you call that thing that looks like a hamburger, but it's made out of lentils? Yeah. I think so too. A lentil, exactly that. A lentil. And I gave your question some thought after our discussion. In Woolworths, you were shopping in the wrong section.
Look, I admit that. I figured out now.
The meat is over there and the veggies are over there.
I think I was in a rush in my defense that day. But no, I mean, it doesn't actually make any sense. Why you would choose to go this far. But anyway, can I please open it up to the room if there's any other questions for Nicole? Please.
They are forced to do this. They currently have grown to the point where they're employing 500 people in their Durban-based factory. They run their lines line by line by line. If they have to change the packaging to accommodate the South African market, because they're now exporting, and they're, I believe, one of the country's largest exporters of these types of products, they might not be able to survive that regulatory change. I thought about it in terms of brown and white bread. If you want to increase your consumers' purchase of brown bread, it's not by cannibalizing the white bread trade. And people who choose to eat white bread are not likely to change their mind because you tell them their brown bread is yummy. Because I like white bread, you're not going to convince me to eat brown bread. If I make a choice about what I'm going to eat, you're not likely to get me back by trying to regulate this market to being a meat eater, simply because I can no longer find a veggie burger in the trade. I think it is a growing industry, though, to answer your question quite simply.
Yeah, it does sound like there are some market concerns behind it. I think there's another question at the back.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, is the position that plant-based meat alternatives find themselves in, by that I mean being in a space without any regulation, is that unique?
So currently, they're not without regulation in totality. They still have to comply with the Food Standards Act and the regulations that stipulate what labels must go onto, what the requirements are for food labeling. The dispute right now is around whether or not what to call this product, and that comes in. There's a SAN standard that deals with it, and there's R146 that deals with it. And no, they're not unique. So they're not completely without regulation. It's just what do we call these products? The beer industry is facing a similar situation where there have historically been a foodstuff. In the last year, there was an amendment to the Liquor Products Act where beer is now under the Liquor Products Act and no longer under the foodstuffs, and they have two different sets of regulations. That amendment is not yet enforced, but in that same industry, we've got a body that to change labels, they're not sure yet what the regulations will look like. So they're also sitting in a wait and see game to see what will happen in the future. So it's not a unique position. And they're not the only body in the food industry facing this dilemma.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
No problem.
Oh, sorry, there's one more.
Oh no.
Hello? Oh, it's actually two more. First one, which links to the second one, is that I've been trying to gather from your discussion, where does this come from? Are there lobbies for it? What necessitated these changes? And two, looking at other jurisdictions, is there any other jurisdiction that labels in the way that has been proposed, or do we still call it veggie patty?
So I'll answer your second question first. Around the world, there's been no guidance yet on what we should call a vegetarian sausage. We're all still using that language. Everybody is to figure it out, and I think that's the reason why I think that the regulated process need further develop regulations for these types of products, is because they don't know themselves what they will call it. And I'm going to leave you to read into your answer to the first question. There's obviously pressure sitting somewhere, and some of the internet users, the comments left by them, have suggested that there is some kind of lobbying going on behind the scenes.
Cool. Thank you very much.